So Andy Farrell has named his Ireland team to take on the All Blacks in the World Cup quarter-final this weekend. A huge game in Paris and a massive fixture for both of these teams. So that's what I'm getting into in the video. You drop a comment down below. Let me know what you make of the team and let me know about the various different bits that I'll get into in the video. In particular to the question, why have Ireland named it a day early? I don't know, I just find that kind of interesting. I'll explain why. Make sure you're also subscribed to the channel. Really appreciate it. And also, like the video as well. But let's get into it. So here's the team that Andy Farrell has gone with. No changes from that which started the match against Scotland. There are a couple of changes on the bench. And there's been a bit of injury news with Ireland this week, as you'll all be well aware of. So Mack Hansen is fit. He starts on the wing. There was question marks over him because of a calf, but he starts. There's no Henshaw, Ryan, Earls or McCloskey in the matchday 23, which means we've got Joe McCarthy and Jimmy O'Brien named on the bench. So let's start with the wingers actually, because James Lowe was also had a bit of injury news swirling around him. He seems fine. Mack Hansen seemed to be the bigger concern, but Andy Farrell has said that those guys have come through okay, that they're good to start, that they're good to go, and they're named on the wings. I do wonder with Mack Hansen, because I look at the replacements on the bench. I look at Jimmy O'Brien, who covers a few more positions, and I do wonder whether that could be a reason for him over McCloskey on the bench, and whether they just have some slight concern about Mack Hansen, or maybe they are pretty confident he's fine, but they're just covering all bases and covering themselves in terms of the replacements, just in case. You never know, I suppose, with these things. He pulls up early on in the game or in the warm-ups or whatever that might be. So I think that's probably the reason for the bench selection. In terms of the question of why name the team early, I do find this interesting, particularly when you have injuries and you've had a number of injuries that you want to assess through the week. Why not give yourselves as much time as possible before naming your squad? That's probably one of the questions that I would have. I've looked at a number of the quotes from the press conference. I haven't been able to watch the full press conference yet, so I don't know if that was something that was covered in more detail, but I would have thought maybe they would have given themselves more time, unless, of course, actually from a fitness point of view, they're not going to get any further assurances between naming the team today and naming it tomorrow. The other thing as well, of course, is in such a huge week, knockout match at the World Cup, massive occasion for Ireland, we all know that. Get it out the way early. Name the team, deal with your press duties and your media duties, and then it just gives you a bit more time in the build-up to the week to maybe focus on yourselves. It spreads out some of the interviews you have to do, and that sort of thing possibly is another option. And another suggestion for that on why naming the team early could be mind games. Now, I don't think it is that, because I think Ireland under Andy Farrell have never seemed to engage with that element of the game. And even if you look at the Springboks naming 7 players on the bench ahead of that match in the pool stages, Ireland didn't really rise to that. They named their team a couple of days later when they were supposed to. It didn't affect their team selection at all. They very much focus on themselves. So I don't think it's going to be a case of them trying to lay a statement down, say to the All Blacks, this is what's coming. It's just another area that, I don't know, left me with a few questions, I suppose, in particular because of those bits of injury news. But they've done it. And actually what I would say is with this Ireland team, they're very confident in themselves, I think. The mental side of the game is something they've focused on a lot. And Andy Farrell has come in and they've got psychologists in the camp and making this team believe in themselves and be comfortable with being the favourites tag. So in terms of all their other behaviour and naming the team early, I don't think it comes into, I don't know, any other mind games and that sort of thing. But you can let me know if you have a differing view to that. The other thing to mention in terms of this team selection, just a nice little narrative to keep us going through the week, is the New Zealand links in the team. You look at Bundee Aki, James Lowe, Jamison Gibson-Park, guys that moved overseas and got their international opportunities with Ireland. And it's one of those funny things really with international selection and where players do get opportunities, because I look at a James Lowe or a Mack Hansen and I think if they're playing in England, for example, I think England are quite a good example of this. They wouldn't get selected, but they've been selected for Ireland. They've been sensational and they fit into that team environment brilliantly. And I wonder if it's the same now with the All Blacks. Sometimes players, for whatever reason, can't get in certain teams. They go overseas, they got an opportunity and they excel. And you have to be in the right environment, around the right players, in the right system to get the best out of you. And all of those players that I've mentioned, that's absolutely the case with this Ireland team. So I'd imagine it's not going to be a focus whatsoever for the All Blacks, but if they can put a few shots in on those boys in the game, they'll be pretty happy with that. In fact, that's something that Billy Vunipola spoke about in the build-up to the England-Samoa game, having previously played Tonga for England and knowing that when you have the option to play for that country and you end up playing somewhere else for whatever reason, they always like to get one over on you. So that's probably going to be something bubbling away. But overall, what do you make of this team? The fact that it is so close to the strongest team in terms of the players that are available, I think Ireland are in a really good spot. They have played a lot of minutes. If you compare the starting 15s and you compare some of those top teams in the world, the amount of minutes that the Irish players have played heading into the quarterfinals by the end of the pool stages is a lot higher. And I think there is reason for that. I think the fact that they had a couple of games that they could build into before their two biggest games in the pool meant they got players game time. A player like Johnny Sexton has needed to play a lot because he had 6 months or whatever it was where he was injured and then banned, so he couldn't play in the build up to the competition. But you do wonder whether that starts to play a factor. I think Ireland will be prepared enough to deal with that, but again, it's probably just another interesting layer in terms of what we might see. But there's strength there, there's strength across all areas of the team. They're cohesive, etc., etc. I don't think there's too much to get. Well, there are things we could get into, but there's not a huge amount to get into when I look at that Ireland 23. What I have had a little look at, though, is just a few areas of the game, and this might be something I try and do in more detail once we've seen the New Zealand team, in terms of areas that could be important for both teams and looking at how they've performed up to this stage in the World Cup and why that's therefore important when we get into that quarter-final. So first of all, looking at red zone entries. If you look at Ireland, they've had the most entries and they've scored the second most points per red zone entry. Their efficiency actually isn't as high as some other teams, but that's not as much of an issue when they're getting into the 22 so often, and that's been a real feature of their game so far at the tournament and actually over the last few years, is how efficient they are at getting themselves into that 22. You look at New Zealand as well, and this is going to be bolstered, I know, by the games against Italy and the game against Uruguay. They've got the second most entries into the 22, but they've scored the most points, and they are the most efficient side when they get into that area of the field. And I was trying to look back, and I'm pretty sure as well, that game against France on the opening night, that was reflected in that game as well, and that New Zealand got themselves into the 22 early, scored a try, and then they spent a long time where they weren't in it. It's kind of an All Black team that if you let them get into the right areas of the field, because of the strength they have in their backline, they are able to punish you. So two teams who get into the red zone, they put points on the board. Who can maintain that, I suppose, is going to be absolutely crucial. It's interesting that Ireland have had the highest amount of possessions that have ended in the opposition 22 in terms of the style of play that they implement. They kick it more than the All Blacks. They don't offload quite as much as the All Blacks, but what they have been doing is working because it's got them down into the opposition red zone more often than any team that are coming through into the quarterfinals, which is quite interesting. The other thing I wanted to mention, which is a bit more player specific because we're talking about that Ireland team selection, but that's Bundee Aki and how sensational he has been. 19 more carries than any other Irish player. He's got the most line breaks, the most metres made, the most defenders beaten. I think New Zealand halting him is absolutely crucial. And I know there are other players within that Ireland team that can hurt you, but Bundee Aki's ability from the midfield and from inside centre to get them on the front foot in this World Cup so far has been crucial. And I'd imagine that's something that the All Blacks will be focusing on to try and help slow him down and help slow that Irish ball down, essentially. But it's going to be a brilliant matchup. They're two teams that are fascinating to watch. How do you see it going, genuinely? I think all the quarterfinals are really difficult to call. I would give Ireland the edge in this because I think from what we've seen in the World Cup so far, they are playing the best rugby. They have been the best team in the world over the last 18 months to 2 years. But the All Blacks are so dangerous. And if they can match Ireland up front, at that gain line, if they can halt Ireland, slow their ball down and generate quick ball for themselves, then we know that's an area of a game where any match of rugby is always going to be hotly contested and is going to be so important for the outcome, in particular with that All Blacks backline. Give them front football and they will be able to cause people damage. So it's going to be fascinating. I'll be doing another video when the All Blacks team selection has been announced tomorrow. So drop a comment down below. What do you make of it? What do you make of some of the questions I've posed? Why they've named it early? And also about maybe some of the players that aren't there. I know Keith Earls and James Ryan, they're hoping will be back in time should they make it to a semi-final. Let me know your comments. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. Can't wait for it. So comment down below, like the video, and also subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.